This is Robert Merdlacci, the MindShare Report, and welcome to this special MindShareTV episode of InnovateHERs podcast series number 9 with co-author Barbara Kurshan in conversation with special guest Vicky Colbert and Betsy Corcoran. And today's podcast focuses on why purpose-driven entrepreneurial women rise to the top. Introducing our co-author, Dr. Bobbi Kurshan. She's an educational entrepreneur and expert on how innovation and technology are transforming teaching and learning. She has spent more than 30 years working in and researching in education marketplace. Kurshan is senior fellow and innovation advisor who launched the nation's first master's program in educational leadership. Dr. Kurshan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Our guest, Vicky Colbert, is laureate of the 2017 edition of the Eden Prize for Education Development and 2013 Wise Prize for Education Laureate. Vicky Colbert is the founder and director of the Function Escuela Nueva. She is co-creator of the worldwide renowned Escuela Nueva model, and it was first national coordinator. Colbert has pioneered, expanded, and sustained this educational innovation for many organization spheres as Vice Minister of Education of Colombia. Thank you for joining us, Vicky.
So happy to be here, Robert. Thank you so much.
And our next guest, Betsy Corcoran. She is currently runs Lead Ventures, which focuses on how to use technology to support learning. Previously, she co-founded EdSurge, a publication I follow very closely and continue to do so, which rapidly became the leading information hub for teachers, entrepreneurs, and school leaders with a commitment to EdTech. As CEO of EdSurge, she led the development of an award-winning news team, a robust conference program, in-depth research, and job boards. In 2019, she negotiated EdSurge's successful acquisition by ISTE, of which I recently returned yesterday, in fact, from the ISTE Live conference in Philadelphia. Thank you, Betsy, for joining us this afternoon, making time for us.
Thrilled to be here.
I'm going to pass the virtual baton over to Bobbi for the first question.
Thank you, Robert, and so glad to have you, Vicky and Betsy. And I've known both Vicky and Betsy for a long time, and Vicky and I first met when we were awarded the first round of WISE prizes and WISE fellows in Doha at the first WISE conference. And we've stayed in touch and been friends and run into each other around the world. And Betsy met as when she came to do an interview for Scott McNeely when I was running the Curriki organization for Scott. And I'm excited to let Betsy know, who was with Forbes, that today my Forbes blog was picked up by the University of Pennsylvania's newsletter. And it was very exciting because they only picked 3 or 4 articles to point out every day in their university newsletter to all their students and alums. So kind of nice to know it. Round circle here. And it was on mentorship. So had great mentors and have been mentors to many people. So Vicky, we're thrilled to have you here today. And in your book, and when we looked at your story, you mentioned some interesting things about taking calculated risk. And you certainly have started at the very beginning of your career taking calculated risk. So could you share with us how you thought of designed this paradigm that moved from a teacher-centric model in Escuela Nuevo to a child-centered model? I love it. I've always loved it.
Well, from the outset, we were thinking of, how, Escuela Nueva, which means new school in Spanish, we just started as a local innovation, and we wanted from the outset to impact national policy. And right now it's one of the longest bottom-up innovations of the developing world that's still being sustained. We started with a rural multi-grade, but which we were actually nothing new in the philosophy of education. We just wanted a little bit of John Dewey, a little bit of Montessori, child-centered. We've known this for more than 100 years. It's nothing new, but we just wanted to put it in practice. And for us, necessity was the mother of innovation. We were forced to do it. And I started working with the rural teachers themselves, looking for the solutions because we wanted, we're very philosophical in Latin America. We need to be more pragmatic. And we wanted to transform all this complexity into very simple, manageable action. So since we know that we have to work with changing attitudes and behaviors, and that takes time, uh, but we really thought about how to do this and how to transform all this into very simple action. And I think that's what we've managed because it's still being sustained and it impacted national policy and it has inspired many educational reforms worldwide. But I guess our strength was transforming all this complexity into very simple, manageable action. That's what we wanted to do from the outset. And working with the teachers because with them, we co designed every step. And this is what we wanted to do. We just wanted, that anything we did was viable technically, politically, and financially. Because, in Latin America, unless you get the teachers on board, our unions are very powerful and very strong.
So early in our story, we talked about what you were doing and went around in these rural areas with this young teacher that you had referred to, and you basically asked the teachers to join in your community and your design. So you were really one of the early creators of what Betsy refers to as communities of innovation. So how did you run those communities, and do they continue to run? How does the leadership of them work? Lots of females are teachers. So, do you see anything interesting about the communities of innovation that you built?
Yes, well, a little bit to get to the communities of innovation. First, the way we did the training. Teachers first would have to see something in action. They have a visual image that they would see a school, that we wanted to, as an example of what we wanted to reach, because they're full of theory and what they need is to see things in action. So we had a demo school to show them so that they can say, we can do it. Okay, this was very important. And something that we had to do, trying to outbeat teachers' colleges, was that we trained them with the same methodology that they will be using with their children. Because how can you expect teachers to make the change if they themselves have been trained in a very traditional teacher-centered way? And the third thing was not to leave them alone. So we created what we call micro centers or, teachers learning circles where they used to get together and share what they were doing. So now these teachers learning circles became a community of practice. And this is why it's so important because we got the teachers on board because they saw we had concrete solutions and we co-developed with them. So we have a community of practice. And this is why I think at this moment, it's one of the only innovations that's still being sustained after so many years and demonstrating that, yes, it can be done. Okay. And of course, we have had decades of research behind, and that's important. But just getting the teachers in the whole participatory strategy is so crucial from the outset. We never talked about design thinking, about those things at the beginning, no, but it was just getting them on board. It was just so simple. So I think that was one of the secrets.
I think, Vicky, what you've described is a phenomenal example of, what we have seen through research is how people change their minds, right? And what we have understood through research is that the people change their minds in stages. Number one, they have to see exactly what you said. They have to see that the new action fits into the world. It makes sense. It resonates with where things are going. Secondly, they have to see people they know and that they admire and that they would like to be part of doing it. And they have to feel that they can join that group. And then the third thing is the path to doing that has to be clear, because they can see, you can have examples of people who are doing amazing things, but if you cannot see what the path is for you yourself joining that circle, being part of that group, then it's impossible. And so you did that so beautifully. Like you said, you had examples of people who were doing things in action. You had ways that they could come together with their peers and with leaders. And it became clear how they could do that. So I think that you were just a perfect example of how you build those communities and how you motivate change in a group.
Fascinating. I'm having flashbacks to my master's program at Pepperdine in EdTech. Dr. Margaret Ryle, it was, I think she coined the learning circles. It was the theorist behind that. And Vicky, I'm curious, I'm fascinated by the innovation center concept. What inspired the thinking around your theory?
I guess I don't know if I understood the question, Robert, but
I was sorry. I was asking Betsy. Yeah.
Oh, Betsy,
sorry.
sorry.
My headset cut out. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, I would love to take credit for it, but I can't. It's actually research on decision making that has been done for decades, and I think I might have crystallized it a little bit more.
Right.
But there is good deep research about how people make decisions, how they change their minds, and what is it that influences them to change their minds. One of the weird mistakes or fallacies that we often make is we say, oh, well, we just need a lot of data out there and people will see the right thing to do. In point of fact, data very seldom changes anyone's mind. It might justify what they do, but as Vicky so beautifully pointed out, they need to see examples of people that are doing it. They need to see it in practice. It needs to fit into their world model of this is the way the world works. And then they need a path. And quite frankly, that was very much the philosophy and the underlying current of a lot of the work that we did at EdSurge. We ran conferences because we were trying to show people things. We wrote articles to kind of help them understand the context. And then we tried to invite them to be a part of all of that.
So let me follow up on that and talk a little bit about the book and where where we talk about Vicky. Clearly, we're asking people to take risk. And we found in our book that women InnovateHERs take a lot of risk, but they take what's called calculated risk. They're much more thoughtful about the risks they take, both in understanding the theory and in understanding the people they're working with. So do you think Vicky and Betsy, I'd love both of your thoughts on this. Do you think that having a risk profile, this calculated risk, hinders innovation or supports innovation, promoting it or accelerating it? Either one can start.
Vicky, do you want to start on that?
Well, you have to take risks, but calculated risks, okay? That's important. Some calculation behind the risk is very crucial, yes, but you have to take risks. And I think that's what we did. We had to take risks, but we wanted first to demonstrate that it could be done. And then once we did this, then, it was a process of scaling up. But first, we wanted to be sure we were doing so. First, we had to demonstrate, and this is not new what I'm saying. David Corcoran has written about this for many years of how to scale up. First, you have to demonstrate it works, okay? It's there and that they see it and they have a visual image and that there's a fit between your proposal or your model or whatever it is and the beneficiaries. So I think that first stage was demonstrating that it worked. And the second was it could expand. And then here you have to concentrate more on reducing costs. Then you have to be not only demonstrate that it can be done, but also to demonstrate some efficiency. And then you're ready to scale up. So I guess we did take risks, but we had first a lot of research demonstration behind with our pilot stages, our first stage. And that was so important because we wanted to show with empirical evidence. I originally was a sociologist someday in my life, and I still, and I think that helped a little bit because at least we always had empirical data behind everything we did, and that has helped us to maintain ourselves and to maintain Escuela Nueva as a national policy. But of course, there are many things about this. Once you scale up, then you have to learn to scale down because there are many issues about this. But the main point here is that we had a calculated risk, definitely, but we had to first demonstrate effectiveness of what we were doing.
So I think, Bobbi, your point about calculated risk is excellent. The opposite side of that is people make the point that hope is not a strategy, right? So in other words, calculated risk means I'm taking a chance. It could fail, but I have done a lot of preparation. I've done a lot of work, and I think you outline this in the book. I've built up networks, I've built up knowledge, as Vicky said, I've built up research, I've done things to prepare myself for it. By contrast, people who just say, I'm going to try to do it, and don't really think about the consequences, or don't really think about how do I prepare myself for it. That's a different kind of risk profile that leads to, oftentimes, flameouts, right? Um, but
And
I think
sometimes success. I mean, there
sometimes success, but sometimes people win the lottery too.
exactly.
So I think that the idea of calculated risk again goes very much with the philosophy that hope is not a strategy, and that you need to have a strategy for how you're going to move forward. The one question, though, I'd love to ask Vicky is, risk. What does risk mean? How did you feel when you took those initial steps? And I'll ask it this way, that there have been times that I've made choices in my life, say, for instance, starting EdSurge and so forth, when it did feel like a big risk, and it did feel a little bit like you were standing on the edge of a diving board and you were going to make a big choice. I'd love to hear how you felt about the risk that you were taking when you were getting started with Escuela Nueva. Did you feel that it was a big risk? Did you feel that it was a little risk? How did you feel about it?
Well, I felt a lot of certainty because I was working with the rural teachers themselves. So, this was so important because they were with me. And we concentrated very much on the house. Because Latin America, very theoretical, we concentrate on the whys, but not the house. Okay. So we concentrated on the house and to make it simple, because that's what we wanted to make sure. So anything we wanted to design, I was always with them, making sure that that they understood, that they could put it in practice, that other teachers could put it in practice, and that it was easily replicable. So it is a calculated risk, but since I was always with them, I was permanently testing everything with them. And I think this is one of the strengths. This was one of the strengths. Maybe I took a bigger risk when I decided once this became a national policy, and then I ended up at the end being vice minister, and we universalized primary education in Colombia and all this. And then Latin America started to decentralize, and all these things happened. Then I said, "Oh my God, everything's going to go down the gutter." So I created an NGO, and this was it's a different thing. So I created an NGO because I said, we're not going to let this fade away, because usually it's when an innovation becomes a national policy, then you say, "Oh my God, now it's a government policy. I hope they don't ruin it." So then we created an NGO, a small NGO, which is Fundación, the NGO I'm heading, Escuela Nueva Foundation, with rural teachers themselves. And there we were, because we wanted to continue innovating and to make sure that the government was doing things right. So I think I took more risk when I didn't want to get a United Nations pension or whatever, and I decided to create an NGO. That was the big risk. Okay. But I felt so secure because I was with all these teachers, these wonderful
Amazing.
teachers.
I think Bobbi wanted to jump in with.
No, I was just going to say, when you were talking about having teachers need to see it, we almost named the book "See It to Be It," because one of our other innovators in the book, when she was talking about it, she Krish, who runs the Lutheran Refugee Committee, she referred to the "See It to Be It" as, and we took a long time to come up with InnovateHERs, but I do believe that we're kind of in this conflict now with entrepreneurs. Women have this calculated risk, filter, but we also see the speed at which innovation needs to take place. I am looking at many entrepreneurs that are coming to me today just whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, and saying, here's my idea, this is my model. And I say to them, well, have you considered now what, ChatGPT is going to do? And if you don't consider that, you're not getting in front of people that are going to listen to you. It doesn't mean you have to change the world tomorrow, but you need to innovate at a speed that we're not used to innovating. We've had a lot more time taking calculated risks to do it. So there's got to be this balance between risk and innovation. So my question is, if you build these communities of innovation, are you impacting how we innovate? Are you impacting how long it takes for innovation to be accepted? Because Vicky, you took a long time and it was a slow process to get your model accepted over many years. You wouldn't have many years to do that today.
Right, not today. How do you accelerate?
That's right.
What's the accelerator?
Yeah, so either Vicky or Betsy, comments.
Well, I think that there's an interesting relationship between innovation and iteration, right? And Bobbi, I think some of what you're talking about gets to exactly that question. You can start with a model, but then how are you going to iterate that model? How are you going to incorporate new things, new bumps in the road, new technologies that come up? And how are you going to course correct and change? One of the things that absolutely has impacted the speed of innovation or iteration, and I'd love to hear if you think they're fundamentally different, or how they're fundamentally different, is communication. I mean, the fact is that today we can get on, whether it's Zoom calls or instant messaging and so forth, and we can start to change our minds and change our models and change our direction very, very swiftly. And by contrast, we'll all date ourselves, but, I think we can remember a time when you had to physically always get on the plane or write a letter. Remember airmail letters? And communication itself was much slower. So perhaps I'll put this forward as a proposition. As communication speed has increased, iteration starts to become innovation, because we can change that much more quickly.
Vicky, you have any thoughts on it?
Yes, well, actually, for us, I think I can give the example in rural areas, children do not have technology in Latin America. Okay, so with the COVID situation, our self-paced learning materials were so crucial. So the teachers went to the schools, photocopied them, gave the children, because they're self-paced learning materials. And that was very crucial. So children don't have connectivity, but teachers do, because they live in the smaller towns where they have more access to connectivity. So for us, the COVID situation was very interesting because it strengthened our community of practice, a virtual campus. We have a small virtual campus. I'm going to be needing your help, Betsy, by the way. We have a virtual campus. Teachers were a little bit lazy to use it for isolated rural areas, because that's where we work. The most isolated rural areas of Colombia, and our geography is very complex. So it was so interesting because at the beginning they were a little bit shy, but then during the COVID situation, our virtual campus became a huge community of practice. No? Yeah. And this has been amazing. This, not the children, the teachers. Okay. Teachers. So this was very interesting, and we're trying to maintain that community of practice living, very stimulated. And this, we did it jointly with the previous government. So, all of a sudden, we had 7,000 teachers that registered, and we couldn't handle all of them. But this shows that in a way, Escuela Nueva has gone beyond just being a program. I think it's more like a movement, a pedagogical movement. And I think that's what's interesting. It has become more like a movement. And I've been so surprised to see that the teachers, one of the reasons why it has been sustained so many years is because the teachers are the ones that sustain it, because they felt that this helped them and they saw results in their children. So that's what made a difference.
And I think iteration, as you said, is part of innovation. It's synergistic. It's not synonymous, but it's certainly synergistic. And I do think that one of the issues, going back to the calculated risk, because if you're going to iterate at a faster speed, your calculated risk profile or trait may help you as well as hinder you, because a lot of our InnovateHERs spend more time considering what they're going to do. So if innovation is moving quickly, your process of doing that is speeding up. The good news is it can speed up because we do have tools like the internet and ChatGPT. So we can get opinions, they can find stuff. So getting the data and the information we need is speeding at the same time that innovation is speeding up. So there is this, I think right now, some friction. I think as time passes, the friction will reduce because we will learn, our minds will work differently about thinking about innovation. Robert, you have
Yes.
to go up with the last.
Well, I'm curious. It's a good segue to the next question that's on my top of mind, having come from Misty and Richard Collada. We talk a lot about AI in education and walled gardens. How are each of you leveraging AI or anticipating you'll leverage AI in your own organizations to continue to keep the innovation curve steep?
Yeah. So I think that's such a important question right now, right? Because Robert and Bobbi, as you both know, I started my career not as a sociologist, but as a science reporter. And so I have written about artificial intelligence for a very, very long time. And what we know is that it is incredibly powerful right now, but there are areas in which it will have a huge impact and areas in which I would argue it will probably have a very minor impact. At this moment in time, we're talking about it in such generalized terms that we're not making that difference. So let me give you a for instance. You could use artificial intelligence in a learning application to help understand why a student is struggling with a concept. That's a great place to introduce AI because teachers there's a long history of being able to sort of diagnose, okay, why is a child is stumbling over multiplying fractions or something like that. By contrast, we're also seeing efforts to use AI to create brand new lesson plans. Well, where do you really want AI to work? I would argue that understanding where the stumbling is going on is a great application, but creating the lesson plans still speaks to the creativity that educators bring to things. It still speaks to motivation. I'm willing to let our teachers continue to kind of build some amazing lesson plans, but to use AI as a tool to try to help understand where kids stumble. So I think as we get more sophisticated in thinking about AI, we're going to know what point in the learning process is it valuable and which point is it not.
Mhm.
Well said, Betsy. Thank you so much. Vicky.
We're going to be needing your help, Betsy. I guess that's the stage we're in right now.
Well, okay. That's what communities of innovation are for.
Exactly. So,
but in Vicky, in your model, one of the things you do is you produce a curriculum that can be self-directed and peer-to-peer enhanced. So as you expand, and we know there's not enough teachers in the world, not only in developing countries, but even in developed countries. And if the AI may not produce creative lesson plans, but remember, teachers are not instructional designers. So we have a lot of teachers that struggle to build lesson plans. And in Vicky's model, she's getting non-teachers to also be to be the peer-to-peer teachers. So I see that where you're somewhere in the middle, I don't disagree with you. I do understand where we're heading, where there is an opportunity, having run Curriki, which was an open source platform, and people were, developing plans. There is a place where the kind of lesson plans you need to teach, multiplication may come from an AI. Clearly, the Khan Academy has just announced their new launch product, which is heading in that direction. So how do we control it? And ISTE just announced, the walled AI program that they're putting out for education. Do we want to wall it? I remember when we first got the internet and we were trying to limit search engines. And my argument was, well, that's a two-edged sword. If you limit search, you change creativity and thinking. So if somebody put in, I want to know, my mother has breast cancer and I want to know about it, and the people that were trying to wall the internet say, well, we don't want them to see pictures of breasts. So you run into this, the technology actually enhances creativity, but it also can be a detriment to creativity. So lots going on in the industry today. I have one last question. I know we're a few minutes towards the end, but Vicky, you've had a global impact on education. I go everywhere in the world and everybody knows who Vicky is, and they know Escuela Nuevo. And you and I've had this conversation before. Do you think in some places your model has worked and in some places you've said it's not going to be the right model or they're not going to implement it? So have you seen that there's globally some differences in these communities of innovation that have either hindered or helped your model grow?
Well, I guess we learned the hard way, because first of all, we modularize the curriculum, and any national curriculum we start modularizing it, and we do, in our case in Colombia, we do give the teachers their lesson plans because they don't have time to plan every day for wonderful lesson plans, especially in a multi-grade setting where a teacher has to handle several grades simultaneously. They just don't have the time. So we give them, so it was easier for them to adapt and to make adaptations to the proposals we gave them of lesson plans. And the lesson plans we ended up seeing is just the intelligent questions for children, because now the teacher has a new role in Escuela Nueva. She's not a transmitter of information, of instruction, because the information comes packed in other ways. So she really assumes a new role as a guide and a mentor and orientator, facilitator. But I think the most important thing is the design of our learning guides is just the intelligent questions you have to put to make sure that the 21st century skills are there for critical thinking, for analysis. So I think this for us was so important because it's just the art. A good lesson plan is the art of making the intelligent questions. Because now with children here in rural areas in Latin America, they don't have access to connectivity. They probably will later on. But for us, it was so important to stimulate the learning process and a scientific method behind the learning process. So I guess that's what we wanted to focus on. It's this question and not this one. It's the intelligent question. So actually, a lesson plan is a class. Are the intelligent questions that the teachers make to children, and in this case, are learning materials. I don't know if I answered the
No, you did. It was very helpful. Just sort of one qualification on it. So I remember we talked about when you were going to take your model to Vietnam.
Oh yeah. I forgot that part. Second part of your question. Yes. When we have worked in some countries, we have worked with governments because to get into schools you have to have the government's permission. So we always work with governments. In the case of Vietnam, it was wonderful because they did it in all Vietnam. They applied Escuela Nueva in all Vietnam with an excellent impact evaluation from the World Bank. And of course, the Vietnamese came here. They saw schools in action. The visual image that we talked, Betsy. They have to see schools in action to get so that they can understand what will happen in their planning process. But what I have learned is you need to have not only governments in place, you have to have a partner in place from civil society or from the private sector. Why? Because I have learned after so many years that you need to work with governments if you want to have impact and coverage. But you need the role of public-private partnerships and the role of civil society for two words: quality and sustainability. If we had not created our small NGO, now we're influencing on the quality of the policy of Colombia, as we have done in other countries. So in other countries in Latin America, we work with the governments, and then the government changes, and then the innovation fades away. So, it's been so difficult and so hard. So now I learned the hard way. Every time I go into a country, I look for somebody from the private sector and get them in the picture to make sure that when there's a government change, I can hold on somebody else. Okay. So you have to have the three dimensions, both public sector, private sector, and civil society involved.
Okay. Robert, we're going to let you close it up.
Absolutely. But I wanted to share with you, Vicky, one of the problem-solving exercises the superintendent had in Texas with his rural district. They had no internet access, and he partnered with Starlink to offer sustained internet access and deliver equity across the entire district from urban to rural. So maybe we can talk offline about that and a little more, and I can put you in touch with that superintendent. That was a public-private partnership that was groundbreaking. I'd never heard of anything that innovative, and we're in Canada here, and we have lots of challenges with mountains and rural poverty, etc. There are,
and you're a third world. You're not a third world country. You're a first
that's
world
right.
country.
It's very true. Betsy, I'd love to get your final thoughts to share on today's podcast.
I think that first I want to thank you all for including me. Bobbi, your book is really inspiring. I do think that part of innovation is friction, though. And I think that what Vicky said about the lessons she's learned and the lessons we've all learned the hard way, part of innovation is being able to and being willing to bump your knees and scrape your elbows and to learn. And so I guess me personally, I don't imagine, maybe I wouldn't even hope that friction would go away. I think it is fundamentally a part of innovation. And it is the difference between genuinely reaching further and trying something new and not reaching for those stars. So
brilliant and inspirational, ladies. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Betsy, Bobbi, and Vicky. This concludes episode number 9 of the MindShareTV InnovateHERs podcast series. My name is Robert Merlanchi of the MindShare Learning Report. Be sure to check out www.mindsharelearning.com to get your latest issue, and be sure to get your InnovateHERs personal copy by going to Amazon. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.